We had a lot of great resources, but people didn't necessarily know about them. I think that's a perennial issue with public libraries. And as I mentioned before, every user needed their own sort of personalized user manual to interact with us online. Imagine how frustrating that would be if your physical library worked that way, right? Everyone had to come in and say, oh, well, for you, you have to go down this hallway and turn right, and then, so. We had no plan at the time to manage growth or meet the expectations of our users. And a comment came in on our website. Excuse me. As much as I want to support our local libraries, I do not have the time to allocate to visiting the library in search of books. Unfortunately, I found your website so tedious to use that it became easier for me to pay the Amazon price for electronic books than to waste my time trying to use your site any longer. I hope that one day this will not be the case. Aren't we all kind of afraid of that kind of thing? Yeah, I mean, obviously none of us have the budget to spend like an Amazon or a Netflix, but I think this really encapsulated kind of what we face today. Our users expect a different kind of access point. So enter user-centered design. Does anyone want to throw out an attempt at a definition of what that is?
A website that's easy for our patrons to use.
A website that's easy for our patrons to use? That's perfect. I think, I am talking today about a website. I'm talking about a rather expensive website project that we undertook. But I want to make sure that we don't just tie that to websites, because the kind of things I'm talking about today, we now use when we put in a new parking system. We did strategic planning. We use the same tools for that. We use it, recently we're talking about changing our email service. We used it for that. Michael wrote from scratch a summer reading online program for us, and we used it for that. So it applies to websites, it definitely applies to technology projects. But if you're designing a new front desk, or you're designing a sign even, if it was important enough, you could use these tools to make sure that you're meeting those needs. In terms of the website angle, this guy Aaron Schmidt, anyone heard of him? He writes now for, he used to write this blog, which is great, it has old content on it, but he writes for Library Journal now. He specifically focuses on library websites, but he really opened my eyes. I saw him speak at a conference, Computers in Libraries, over 10 years ago, and he really opened my eyes to this stuff. So I encourage you to check out that resource, because he gives you some good definitions. To me, what user-centered design is, excuse me, I didn't have that written down. Well, yeah, I mean, it's just, instead of looking at things as an employee of a library, you see things as your patron, and you're constantly trying to do that, or whoever you're trying to serve, right? In addition, I wanted to put this resource up here too, usability.gov. I have some templates for you. This website is a treasure trove. It has dozens of different styles of templates for a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about today. A lot more detail than I'll go into today. Definitely recommend you check that out as well. Oh, wait, yes. So going back to our project, this is something of an aha moment for me when we learned that 90% of all public library website visitors want to do one of three things. Do you know what those three things are? Anyone want to throw those out? Check the hours. That's a common one, but that's not in the top three. Find a book, yes, that's number 2, search the catalog.
Use the internet.
Well, use the internet, yeah, in the library, but in terms of if they're using your website.
Hours of operation?
Hours of operation, again, that's popular. Yeah, my account functionality, that's number 1. That's about 45% of all your internet use is check their account, renew books, see where they are in the hold queue. Search the catalog's number 2. I forget what % that is. And then the last thing now is ebooks and e-content. So you can actually please 90% of your users if you focus on those 3 things and do them exceptionally well. That became an aha moment for us. We started to realize, hey, you know, we can really cover a lot of ground here if we make sure that those things work well. So how did we do it? How did we start doing it? We laid the groundwork for success, right? We wanted to base our effort on the perspective of building a library branch, but online. I think that's a relatively old concept now, but it was what we wanted to focus on. For us, a key step, and I think this is probably true for any project of any size, you know, staff and stakeholder buy-in is kind of the key sauce that makes everything else possible. If people feel like their voices aren't being heard or aren't being valued or followed up on, you're not going to get very far. We spent a lot of time in our team just meeting. It took maybe about a year of monthly meetings or so before everyone, we had about 10 people from different departments talking about what were we trying to achieve here, before everyone got on the same page. We continued then to get support from other stakeholders like library boards, the people that write our budget. Obviously that's important when you're doing a large project. If you're just doing a team project, it's still good to keep everyone looped in and make sure that they know what your goals are and what you're trying to achieve. And then defining a process. How are you going to make decisions? For us, with this new idea of pleasing our patrons, we really wanted to make data the center of our decision-making process. So that was a big part of it. It was a guiding principle. What does the data say? What do we have available that can tell us what people want to do? We'll talk more into how you might gather that data later. Obviously, we are libraries. We have underserved populations to serve as well. So I'm not saying ignore the blind when you're making decisions or anything of that nature. Ignore ESL people. You have to strategically define some of those areas that you need to hit, even if it's not a popular thing. But at least know why you're doing it. Some other things that we did, obviously, after sort of defining a decision-making process is defining what the constraints are. I mean, budget's often one. There's often technology in the way. Maybe your county or whatever requires you to use a certain kind of content management system. Maybe your ILS is stuck in the dark ages on something and you won't be able to do what you want. And of course, there's political considerations as well. The county commissioner really likes purple buttons, so you have to make your buttons purple to please them, that kind of thing. But define those in advance, because that's going to help you as you move through your project. Talked about our branch. And so now I'm going to get into some of the tools that we've used. Excuse me. Having to use 2 computers here, it's kind of slow me down. So yeah, write that down if you haven't done it already. But the first step for us is definitely looking at data. I talked about that earlier. I really like that quote. I don't know who said it, but I think that kind of encapsulates what we're talking about here. I don't know if you feel this way. I'm not a librarian, but I have worked in a library for most of my life, so I feel like I am. I think librarians like to please everybody. Does that sound about right? Yeah. Sometimes, though, you're doing a disservice to your users if you are really trying to please everybody all the time. I think that's sort of a common thing. So the plural of anecdote is not data. If you get someone that says, hey, I really think that you need to have a page on your site about Civil War era stamps. Well, okay. Is there? Well, there you go. That's what the state library is for. Exactly. We saw some of that. you know, it's easy. You want to please that person, and it's not hard with a content management system to create a page or something that might have that information on it. But of course, then you have to make sure it stays up to date. I assume that information doesn't change too often, but it's something you have to maintain, and it's also more content that your 90% of users have to sift through to get to what they want. So in terms of data tools, I mean, we use Google Analytics. I'm sure if you're using websites out there, that's a great tool to get data on that kind of thing. You can now embed them if you're building an app or something like that. You can use Google Analytics for free to get some interesting data on your app. There are other ways, of course, you can collect data. I would say Google Analytics, I always take the information from that with a grain of salt because it doesn't always capture what you think it's capturing, but it's still useful. It's incredibly powerful. There's a tremendous amount of information. And when you go there, at least I feel, and I've been using it for years, a little overwhelmed because there's just too much information. I'm like, well, okay, what does Google Analytics say about our website? I've heard that in lots of meetings. It says a lot, a little more than you can handle, probably. So my advice when you go to Google Analytics is make sure you have a list of questions first. If you don't, you're just going to get lost. You know, if you have specific questions, maybe you won't know how to find the answer, but I'm sure you can ask someone. The internet's a big place. There's YouTube videos. There's all kinds of ways that you can learn how to answer a specific question. But if you just go there to get some sort of general impression, it's not really going to end well, I don't think. Okay. I think much more valuable is the idea of surveying your users. And I hope this is something that maybe you're thinking about using in your iLead projects, is to get a sense of what people really want. Because sometimes you don't know. And so, you know, there's lots of example surveys on that usability.gov site. I'm going to show you the one we used in our project now. This is in that Google Drive folder. Kind of the first three questions there for us are the most powerful ones. First, the general, how likely are you to recommend the site? By itself, that's interesting, but when you start segmenting the answers to some of these other things, I think it's even more helpful because you're learning not only the next two kind of drive into like, why did you come to our site? Usually nowadays, people are very results oriented. So if they're coming to your site, they're not, I think I'll go to the library website and see what I can find today, right? They have one task in mind. So you're going to find out what that one task is for your users if you ask that. So that's question 2 up there. These are the questions we asked. And then the follow-up question, number 3, were you able to accomplish what you set out to do? Yes or no? That's also very valuable because you can immediately divide the survey responses into the people that were pleased, that's good information to have, but especially the people that were displeased, what caused that kind of issue for them? Definitely recommend that kind of structure. There are other ways to do it, of course, but that's kind of the one we do. And then, so you get those 2 together, 2 and 3, and then you add 1 together, and you can find out sort of, okay, well, these people, you would expect people that were able to accomplish their things to be more likely to promote your site, but sometimes not, because you get a lot of fans out there that want to help you anyway. And those 3 elements come together into something that's called a Net Promoter Score. You can look that up. There's a whole website devoted to it. I think it's a trademark. But interestingly, libraries score much better on the Net Promoter Score. It's an industry standard for this kind of thing. But all kinds of industries out there, you know, use it to sort of measure how they're doing against their competition in customer service and that kind of thing, usability. You know, at the very top of the private sector list is things like, you know, boutique department stores, like Nordstrom's or something like that. At the very bottom of the list, any guess? Internet service providers. Yeah, Comcast, as low as it gets. Libraries tend to do better than boutique department stores. Not always, but that is something to keep in mind. All right. So yeah, surveys are good. We didn't do focus groups, but I think especially for smaller projects, sometimes that can be really powerful too. Focus groups aren't the most popular thing nowadays because of people are learning more about different personality types. You can learn a lot of really good information from introverts, but introverts aren't going to speak up in a focus group, especially if there are extroverts in the group. They're going to sit on their hands. So we didn't do it, but I think it's valuable, and you could probably run a decent one, and there's tips on usability.gov to using those. User testing is very, very valuable, especially when you're talking about websites and things where people are trying to achieve a goal or accomplish something. You basically give them a task, right? You might call someone in off from the reference desk and say, hey, can I have 10 minutes of your time? I want to see if you can figure something out for me. You sit them down and show them your site or your project or your whatever you're working on, and you say, see if you can renew your books, or see if you can find an ebook to download. And then you just kind of sit back and watch. You can encourage them. There's some really valuable scripts on usability.gov, again, that sort of points you to ways that you can get information out of people without sort of, interrupting their thought process. But that's really, really valuable. There's some cool tools out there, too. We used, with our project, I don't remember the name of the product now, but it was an online tool. So instead of bringing in library patrons, we were able to get a lot of people right away to do a certain task because they get paid to do it. So you can go sign up to be a tester, and then people get sent a task and a link and say, okay, accomplish this task, and talk out loud as you do it. Get really good data that way. It's something I wish we did a little more on an ongoing basis. I think if you can build that into your maintenance routines, because things don't stay the same. And that's very useful. I think this is probably the most important one, though, because it speaks more about the change in culture when you're looking at your users first. Talk to people. Don't just sit behind the desk and sort of wait for people to come to you with questions. Stand in front of your catalog stations and sort of keep an eye on what people are doing. You don't have to be creepy. You don't have to, scare them. But you can say, oh, I noticed that you were clicking on this button. Were you trying to find our ebooks? Can I help you find it? You learn a lot of really valuable information that way. And if you can get your whole team or your whole library or whoever you're working with to do this as sort of a cultural belief, you learn a lot more about how your organization is functioning and is serving its users. So be open, learn how to approach people, even if it's a little scary, because I think you learn really good information that way. I do happen to think that user stories are probably the most important thing in this process. This is kind of the thing that is most portable that we have used in just about every decision-making process that we've come up against at Schlow since we started doing this for the website. I'll show you what ours kind of looks like. It's a real basic thing. The first column, well, it's the second column on here, is as a X, so as a patron, as a homeschooling mom, as an interlibrary loan user, as a potential donor. So that's the one thing, is you kind of have to identify who that person, what their perspective is. And then you just tell a brief story. It's a sentence, maybe even a phrase or even a word or two. As a patron, I want to renew my materials. Start collecting these. You can do it over time. This is kind of an example of a living document we keep for our website, where we kind of keep an eye on new things that pop up. But you can also do it as an exercise if you have a large staff meeting or something like that, and everyone can just sort of throw them up. Google spreadsheets are great for that because everyone can access them right away. And really those two things, column A and column B on this, is what you need to capture first. After that, you can start to use all of these stories. You can prioritize things, which is really, really important and powerful, especially if you're talking about a large project with probably time and budget constraints. You can decide, as we did, to sort of say, well, this is important, but we can't do it right now, so we'll do it in a phase 2. So you can sort of divide things that way. When you're doing website work, you can also start to build your sitemap this way, your navigation structure, because you can start to see these patterns emerge from these stories. Like, oh, well, a volunteer and a donor actually has very similar goals. They're trying to help the library in some way. Maybe we can group those together instead of having them on separate pages on the site. It's a choice that we made. And then, yeah, there was a scope concerns thing. That was, I'm not going to really talk about that, but that was more because we were working with a finite budget. We wanted to make sure that some of these crazy ideas that sounded awesome would fit within our ability to accomplish them. But the priorities are really the best way to handle that. So we use a simple 1, 2, 3 process. I think any more than that, it gets a little bit hairier. So priority 1 is we must have this when we launch, or a lot of patrons are going to be mad at us, a lot. Priority 2 is, well, maybe that would really help staff workflows, or maybe that would really make things easier on us or even patrons, but it's not something that they're going to be angry about if it's not there. Priority 3 then becomes, boy, that's a great idea, maybe someday we can pull that off. We don't want to lose track of it. So we'll keep it on the list. We'll make it a priority 3. Maybe next year it becomes a priority 1. This is really, really important. I think I talked about the ways that we've used them. Did I miss any? I'm kind of using it all the time now. But I definitely think user stories are a powerful approach. You can even develop, we did, personas. I don't have a slide on this, but you can start to group your users from your user stories into sort of this biography of a person, So like the homeschooling mom was definitely one we talked about a lot. So we gave her a name, and we sort of gave a backstory, and we had like a paragraph about this person. And I think we did 4 or 5 of those. It was mostly an internal team-based tool. It's not very helpful when you're talking to a library board or something, but it's a great way when you're trying to remember, remember Diane, she really values this one piece of the project. We can't forget about that. Sorry. Content inventory. If you're doing a web project, especially if you're refreshing something that already exists, this is a very valuable exercise. Our team kind of decided we weren't going to look at our old site. We wanted to start with the data and see what we could build from scratch. So we didn't really do this, but I've done this with other projects, and it can be useful. There's an example template in that folder. The first worksheet is a blank one that you could use if you wanted to, and then there's sort of an example. Aaron Schmidt, he talks about, at that conference that I attended years ago, he talks about the barnacles on your site. I think I have a slide on that. So this is where you can start to identify these things that your site or your project or whatever you're working on collects over time. Because inevitably, those stamp collectors, find someone that'll answer them and put up a site about that, or a page up about that or something. This is a way to go through and say, do we really need the page for the stamp collectors? You can make that decision. If you use this, I think if you put in the URL and the title here, it'll actually create a linked thing in the Google spreadsheet, which is sometimes useful. Like this. All right. Yeah, and then you can categorize with your user stories. That's also very useful. So once you've developed those user stories, you can sort of, like I said, you can build your navigation structure. Well, you can go that through your existing content and sort of reorganize it that way as well, which can be helpful. Competitive analysis. Again, speaking for librarians, even though I'm not one, I think we're not very competitive people compared to a lot of other sectors. So the idea of competition might be a little scary. And in reality, our competition is the Amazons of the world, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't learn a lot from libraries. And I think we're all really good at sharing our ideas or stealing each other's ideas or however you want to characterize that. So I definitely recommend, if you're working on a project of this kind of scale, or anything, even an app or something, what's the closest thing out there to what you're trying to do? Or in our case, we kind of chose 3, I would say 3 to 5 is a sweet spot eventually. Your team can all select their 5 favorite sites, or maybe one site that they hate, because you can learn a lot from sites you hate too. You can come to a team meeting and you'll distill all of those different sites into like a top 5 for the team, or top 3 or 4. At the time of our project, we used DC Public Library, Hennepin County up in Minnesota. They have like a team of web developers, so they're always making awesome stuff. Multnomah out in Oregon. Guess those are the 3 I have listed there. And yeah, you can learn a lot just by looking at the sites. You can use those personas if you want. So you can say, how would Diane use the DC Public Library site? How would she navigate that? That can be a useful exercise to go through as well, because you learn a lot. You might like the colors, but then learn, boy, the navigation structure doesn't really work. It's useful information. So that's kind of step 1, is kind of look at their sites as a user. But then you can build a network with these people. Reach out to your top 3 sites. Find out who developed their site, or what kind of ILS are they running, or what was the budget, or here's a list of very technical questions about how you achieve the functionality you need. It can be very valuable. We actually identified the vendor that we hired for our project by reaching out to DC Public Library. It's a big site, it's a big organization. I didn't know if I'd get a response to my email, but they did, and I said, hey, you want to talk to this guy? Well, he wound up being the CEO of the company that we hired to do our site. And they were great, by the way, Interpersonal Frequency. One of the best company vendors I've ever worked with, the best on anything, so. Oops. Okay, sculpt the vision. This is similar to the personas, but at one point, as we kind of went through this whole process, we decided to sort of distill everything down to sort of a aspirational mission statement. So we did the persona thing, but we came up with who is the one user who encapsulates what we're trying to achieve on the broadest scale here, and sort of tell a story. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but it's just a page. And what we tried to do in this was hit on a lot of the functional elements we wanted, but we used this woman, Mary Beth, who was a busy mom, who had 30 minutes in the morning to get a whole bunch of library business done, and sort of said, what, in a perfect world, if we achieved all of our goals, what would Mary Beth's experience be like? This was nice. This document was great because it sort of encapsulated for our team what we wanted when we had discussions, when we started yelling at each other about the color or the font or whatever else. We could say, oh, well, just remember Mary Beth, come back to her. It's not that important whether it's maroon or some other dark red. It's more important that we get to the end result here that we all agreed is most important. This also became valuable when we asked the library board for more money. Gave them this story, and they could really see what we were trying to achieve in a simple, one-page explanation. It can be helpful when you're marketing your project as well. Maybe you turn this into a video that promotes what you did. We were really lucky, I guess, because we achieved just about every one of the functional elements that we wanted to achieve in this. Doesn't mean, I guess we need to write a new vision. We're starting to do that now. But it was a good step to take. Style guide. For websites, that was kind of important. It may or may not be relevant to your iLead project, but it's not just what colors, what fonts, although that's good information to have in there. We try to keep it short. I think ours is a page and a half or so. But what it does show is what's your voice as an organization or as an entity. So, you know, a lot of these websites now that you might use, you know, cloud services and stuff, it's kind of hip to be like, hey, what's up when you log in. You may not want to say that on your library site, but what is your voice? What's important to your organization? You know, for us, it was clarity, you know, keeping in mind different language barriers and things like that. Are we trying, you know, does the sentence convey what we need? A succinct way that makes it very clear what we're trying to say? Or are we going to use, you know, really flowery language? Well, we chose clarity. Conversational. I'm going to brush through this because this probably doesn't really pertain to you. Barriers do, though. We all have barriers. When you're starting to sort of figure out how you're going to build your project, you have to define what's going to keep you from achieving those goals. Some things you might be able to make an adjustment to. You might be able to convince your board for a little more money or something. Other things, you know, you might not, you know. But going back to that idea of what impediments are there. Going back to priority again, this is where this becomes really important because you can articulate what you're really trying to achieve, what's the priority one stuff. I have an example of our RFP and an example of how we rescored that. I'm not going to get into that today, but you know, the point is probably what I did was I took our user stories and made sure that the RFP touched on each one of them, even if it was a priority 3, because then you can get a response to all of those things. It becomes a lot easier to score. On scoring, I will say the thing that was most valuable to our process probably was adding a multiplier for confidence. So almost everyone you run into nowadays thinks they are an expert in web design, but you know, after you talk to some references or you see some of their portfolio examples, you might learn, well, yes, this company said they could give us everything we wanted, but they used front page to develop this site. So maybe we don't want to hire them. Confidence score was useful. Then it's time to start, right? Team engagement's really important. I talked about building consensus and sort of having that approach to making sure everyone's voice is heard and followed up on, and that, you know, before you move on to the next step, everyone kind of agrees with where you're going. That's an ongoing process. It was a lesson I learned in this project because, you know, we kind of had a launch, but then we had a lot of bug testing to do and sort of follow-up to do. And a lot of people are like, oh, it launched, so we're done. And, you know, you have to kind of continuously, if you're a project manager in this kind of process, you kind of have to be the cheerleader. You kind of have to remind people why they're there and why it's important to keep going. Project management for me is in this kind of situation all about managing the communication. You know, who needs to know what, when, how. Not everyone needs to see everything or they're just going to tune you out. So come up with a plan for that, I guess. There are some good tools out there. The company we hired liked to use Basecamp, which is a popular project management application. In our library projects, we're using Trello, which is another cool little tool. You can use a spreadsheet. That's fine if it's a smaller project. I guess pencil and paper would work too, if that's really what you're into doing. It's harder to share that with folks, though. So, triage with vision. That's just going back to the priorities. Inevitably, you know, something's going to come up, and maybe it's something that's really important to you, which is, I think, the next bullet point. You know, there are no sacred cows. Maybe, to me, it was really important. I'm going to show you our site a little bit. That we have ebooks in our catalog that people could download directly. It was really important. Well, you know, a year later, I'll talk about this some more. Maybe that wasn't as important as I thought it was, because I wanted it, so it became important. So that means you have to go back to your personas, to your vision statement, to your user stories, to your priorities, because it's an ongoing process. You know, all of a sudden, this thing that seemed it was going to be really easy to do becomes really hard. You have to be able to honestly say, now that it's hard, is it still a high priority? That kind of thing. Okay, so I'll show you our site quickly. I just signed in to my account. One of the things that that our company built for us is this really cool dashboard. You know, remember, 45% users come to your site for this purpose, right? They want to see their vital stats in terms of the library, right? You know, I have 5 items checked out. The next due date's August 2nd. I don't have any overdue items. I don't owe any money. Here are 3 of the books I have checked out. You can scroll through and see more of them. As a parent, it's great to see what they look like. So when I'm looking under the bed, I know whether I'm looking for an orange book or not. So this was a really, I think, a pretty cool thing. We have an integration on our site so you can register for events, and it just shows up right here. So if you're registered for an event, you know, you have a portal to that right here as well. Requests, obviously. People really like to see where they are in the cold queue position. Our survey data proves that. That's like a really high priority thing. So much so that Michael over here helped us show that in search results now too. So if you go to our catalog, you're signed into it, and you search for the title that you've requested, you'll see your queue position right away, right in the search results screen, which I don't have any feedback yet on that, but I think it's pretty neat. Your basic checked out functionality, of course, renewing items, that kind of thing. We integrated fine payments. A lot of ILSs have this now. We're using a really cool service called Stripe, which if any of you in any of your projects have any kind of payment thing, actually we'll be talking about Stripe integration in the Jot form class tomorrow. But Stripe is a really cool, it's kind of like a PayPal thing, but it was really conceived of as a developer-friendly payment gateway. The prices are very competitive to PayPal's. I think it's 2.9% and 30 cents per transaction, something like that. You know, we integrated that. You can suspend your holds when you go on vacation, that kind of stuff. I'll sign out now. We added the online card registration thing, which was something that people seem to really want. Again, going back to those users that maybe never set foot in your library. Maybe this is an important thing to think about again. I know there's always concerns about, oh, well, we're going to get all these people that, you know, aren't valid users in our database. Well, you can build it in a way that that doesn't really happen. We're using a service that verifies the address as a valid address in our county. So if you're outside the county and you put in an address, it's not going to let you create a temporary card. But if you are, you get a card right away. You can log in, you can download an ebook. I haven't seen much abuse, and we've had some kids that come up with funny names, you know, but all this stuff kind of goes into a queue for our patron services folks to look at and validate. The other check then is if you sign up for a card, you have 2 options. We can mail it to the address you used. So if you're actually in Pittsburgh, we're not going to send it to you. Or you can come into the desk and show your ID and pick it up. So this has worked well. We're starting to use the same type of form now to renew our cards as well. It's not as fully automated. The cards don't renew automatically, but it submits an email to patron services who renew the card. Works pretty well. We did that with Jot form too, so another plug for that class. The CAPTCHA, everyone hates them, but they're kind of important on this kind of thing. Otherwise, you're just going to get spammed from Russia or wherever. Navigation-wise, our homepage, you'll see our catalog and our site are stylistically, they look the same. That goes back to the thing that our patrons just don't care that we have something called a catalog or an ILS. They just see it as your website. You know, Overdrive is your website. Love it or hate it. A lot of people hate it. It's true. But you see with those 3 things, okay, we have ebooks and more right here, so that's number 3. We have the search box that's really big, although we do get a lot of people that can't find the catalog. I'm not quite sure. It's not statistically valid, but it's interesting. You get these comments. Where's your catalog? How do I find books? And then, yeah, the login button to the My Account functions. I'll go ahead and do a catalog search. I talked about the ebook stuff. You can limit your search results right off the bat to downloadable items, and you have a drop down right here to the various formats. We later added these things on the left side are called facets. You may or may not know that, but you see that more and more in catalogs and certainly shopping sites. We added this one recently, available now, which is something that people really want, like especially if they're in the building. They don't want to search for stuff they have to put on hold. They just want to leave with something. I would love to get that functionality for the downloads. We don't have that right now. It's something the Overdrive site and app does have. And I think that's one of the reasons why we haven't had as much success with people downloading through the site as they do through Overdrive. So that's something we're certainly looking at addressing in the future. Anything else I should show off, Michael? We have the research tab here. We subscribe to the EBSCO EDS service. This is another kind of sacred cow in library land, I think. We spend so much money on these research databases. If you look at just user data, it's not working. People don't do it. We do get people that want consumer research stuff, consumer reports. And so we continue to pay for that. It's rather expensive, but because that's the one thing that people seem to do. Maybe if you're an academic or a school library, that's different. But public libraries, the stuff is just not getting used. So we continue to pay for stuff, but I think sooner or later, we're going to have some difficult decisions to make. Okay, well, let me get back to my slides real quick. I know I'm out of time, so I'm going to start here. Mobile responsive, that was really important. A little Game of Thrones reference there. When we launched the site, in combination with having self-service pickup and some self-checkout machines, we were able to see an increase in 300% on hold requests. I think it's 400% now, actually. So that means we needed to get a lot more hold shelves. But what I think that translates to, because it's my own user story, I finished reading, or now my kid's reading to me, but we'll finish the Magic Treehouse book, and he says, hey, I want to read the next one. And instead of, oh, I'll have to remember to look for that at the library, I pull out my phone, I look for it, I request it. And we're seeing that a lot of people are doing that. People come into our library, they never leave the lobby, you know? They step in, they grab the book, they check it out at the self-checkout machine, and they're out. They don't even talk to us anymore, which I guess is kind of sad, but that's the way it is. Our CIRC has not really gone up, but it hasn't gone down as much as the national trends kind of have over recent years. We're kind of holding steady for the most part. Website visits, this is a tough metric going back to Google Analytics. That's what Google Analytics tells me. We have 200% more visits to our site now. I'm a little dubious on that. It's probably gone up, but I don't think it's gone up that much. And our mobile use rate, at least when we launched it, was staying ahead of the national trend, especially for library sites. So people were using our site more on mobile devices than on other library sites. Of course, there are caveats. I talked about the Overdrive thing. I think we're still only about 10% of our downloads are through the site. Everyone else is using Overdrive. There's other things. Search performance on our catalog needs to be better. Michael's done a great job. We're getting ready to launch a rebuild of sort of the back end of all that technology to make that happen faster. I think there's I don't remember the number, but I think it's like for every millisecond a patron waits, you lose 3% of them, you know, if they're waiting for web search results. So the response time on your search is really important. And that's the last slide I have. Are there any questions? I'll look to see if anyone posted any. Okay. Any others? Thank you.